welcome to the Young Turks. We've got an interesting, amazing, bigly show for you guys tonight. Believe it or not, we have some good news today. In fact, we have 3 stories that I would classify as good news for progressives. Whoa, how did that happen in the middle of the Trump administration? Well, stay tuned, you'll find out. And then don't worry, I've also got anger at the Democrats. But again, some good news on their fight back today. And then a little bit later in the show, we will tackle the explosive Aziz Ansari story. God help us. There's no way that all sides aren't going to be angry no matter what we say. But that's the Young Turks. So we're going to take it on. Anna and I will discuss it a little bit later and give you our real opinions wherever they may lie. Okay, so now having said that, let's get started. Let's go to Bannon, okay? So Steve Bannon now apparently going to testify. In fact, some of that testimony has begun, but that one is in Congress. And he's not alone. Some of the president's top advisors being called in. Drums, let's explain. President Donald Trump's former chief strategist, according to HuffPost, Steve Bannon will meet behind closed doors on Tuesday with a U.S. House of Representatives committee that is probing whether Russia meddled in the 2016 presidential election. Hold, he's not set to meet, that was earlier today. He has already met, but wait, in the middle of meeting with the House, here's what happened. Bannon was on Capitol Hill testifying, this is according to CNN, testifying before the House Intelligence Committee when news broke that Mueller had issued a subpoena for the now estranged associate of President Donald Trump to testify before a grand jury. Now, the reason why this is relevant is because Steve Bannon now has nothing to gain from Donald Trump and from conservatives. Now, that doesn't mean that he's changing his political ideology. It certainly doesn't mean I know what he said behind closed doors, whether it's to the House or eventually to Mueller. But Trump and all the other conservatives threw him under the bus in the most dramatic, irreversible way you could imagine. So now that he has nothing to gain from them, he has no reason to protect them. Now, he might protect them anyway, based on ideology, or perhaps he doesn't actually know anything. But if he does know something, and he seems to have no hope for recovery in his political or media career, he's also been fired from Breitbart under pressure from the president and other conservative allies, well, he could talk. Now, he said earlier, and he was quoted in the book as saying that, oh no, he's not going to talk and he's not going to testify and he doesn't need a lawyer. Guess what? He lawyered up, because it turns out when Mueller comes a calling as special counsel or even the House Intelligence Committee, yeah, you're going to need a lawyer. So when that lawyer tells him, hey, by the way, it's you or your former allies who now not only despise you, but have publicly ridiculed, shamed, and ridden you out of town, I'm not sure that's that tough a call. So we'll see how that goes down, but it could be a lot of trouble for the president if he's got a loose Bannon on his hands. Okay, anyways, but he's not alone. Here comes more former Trump advisors. Later in the week, the panel will hear from former Trump campaign manager Corey Lewandowski. Now, he is very loyal to the president and not one known for being overly honest. But a lot of this stuff is on the record, and so we'll see to what degree they're willing to skirt the issues, let's put it that way. And by the way, it's possible that any one of these people doesn't know anything about Russian meddling or was not involved. Some members of the campaign and administration might have been involved while others were not. So now we're not done yet. White House Communications Director Hope Hicks, who served as Trump's spokeswoman during his presidential campaign after a tenure with the Trump Organization real estate business, is also expected to be questioned by the committee this week, according to a congressional source. So we got a lot of testimony coming up. By the way, it might be because the Republicans are rushing to wrap this thing up, but when you go to testify, there are Democrats there too, and they could ask tough questions, and ones that perhaps they're not either prepared for, or and first of all, they're part of the Trump administration, of course they won't be prepared. Okay, but even if you were, if you lie on the record, you're going to have massive problems. Again, we don't know if any of these individuals necessarily does know any connections with Russia. And I suppose there's a possibility that nobody did anything with Russia. That's of course not true. We already know Carter Page went to Russia. We know Papadopoulos tried to go to Russia. We know Papadopoulos already pled guilty. We already know Mike Flynn pled guilty. The only question is who else was involved and the scope of that, and did it affect Donald Trump? Hope Hicks and Lewandowski, though, and Bannon at a certain time were among his closest advisors. So if anyone knew something, it might be them. And by the way, not done with Hicks, she has reportedly already sat for an interview with special counsel Robert Mueller's team. So I guess Donald Trump better hope that hope floats. That doesn't even make any sense. Is that blue I see? Is that hope I see? All right, so we'll see how that develops as we go forward. Now, I'm such a goofball. All right, here we go. So Donald Trump had his fitness questioned, both physical, but that's much less important, and mental. So he decided that he was going to do a medical exam. Now, this is not his old doctor, Dr. Harold Bornstein, who was a bit of a character, as you've seen in the past, who gave Trump the note, or Trump might have given him the note to sign, saying that Trump is in excellent physical shape. He's the greatest person, greatest physical specimen that'll ever take the office of the presidency. How do you know you didn't do a medical exam with George Washington or Andrew Jackson? How would you know, right? Anyway, so that guy was a goofball, and that I don't trust what that doctor says at all. But in this case, he was asking the White House doctor, which is Dr. Ronnie Jackson. Now, Dr. Jackson is not attached to Donald Trump, his campaign, or his team. In fact, he was also the same doctor that did the physical of Barack Obama. So Trump comes up to him and says, yeah, okay, yeah, go ahead and test me. And Dr. Jackson says, are you sure? This happened last week, and he's like, no, I'm sure, let's go. We're gonna test both my physical and mental acuity. He's like, all right, be careful what you wish for. So they go to test him, so let's look at his vitals. He's 6'3", that's what he used to say, and we thought maybe he was inflating it. But I mean, Dr. Ronnie Jackson tested him, okay, 6'3", okay, that's the least controversial, least interesting part. So how much does he weigh? 239 pounds. I'm actually surprised by that. He looks a lot more than 239, but apparently 239 it is. Okay, bless his heart. How's he doing on other vitals? Trump's resting heart rate was 68, and blood pressure was 122/74. Well, that's really, really good, especially for a guy his age and for what he eats. It's like, if this was not an actual doctor that we know from the past that has served at the White House under other administrations, there's no way I'd believe it, knowing Trump's record. But apparently it's true. And Dr. Ronnie Jackson says he is in, quote, excellent health. That color me surprised. Okay, well, it is what it is, though. You see, we don't change our opinions based on what we want to happen. It is what it is, right? So, and by the way, I don't begrudge him that he's in good physical shape. Bless his heart, that's not an issue at all. In fact, Dr. Ronnie Jackson had something funny to say, because the reporters, including Jonathan Carr from ABC News, were as incredulous as I was when they first heard the story. We're gonna get to mental fitness in a second, but one last thing about physical fitness, listen.
Can you explain to me how a guy who eats McDonald's and fried chicken and all those Diet Cokes and who never exercises is in as good a shape as you say he's in?
It's called genetics. I don't know. It's some people have just great genes. I told the president that if he had a healthier diet over the last 20 years, he might live to be 200 years old. I don't know. I mean, he has incredible genes. I just assume.
All right. Oh, by the way, Trump is probably beside himself with joy on that. First of all, good, he's healthy, so he should be happy about that. Second of all, when he talked about his good genes, he's like, oh yeah. During the campaign, I read all into Trump's history, and throughout his life, he has kept talking about how great his genes are because of where he comes from. Tick tock, until Trump gets himself in trouble with talking about how great his genes are. But okay, in the case of physical fitness, that is true, okay? Now, mental fitness. This ought to be interesting. So they're not going to test him on intelligence, which would have been awesome. But there's no doctor who's going to test him on intelligence. This is just to see, is he losing it? Does he have any signs of early dementia, Alzheimer's, stuff like that? So it's kind of a bold gambit on Trump's part to go for this. And I think this part is relevant. So Jackson told reporters that Trump scored, wow, a 30 out of 30 on the Montreal Cognitive Assessment, which according to its website is a cognitive screening test designed to assist health professionals in the detection of mild cognitive impairment and Alzheimer's disease. So he doesn't have it. In fact, Dr. Jackson said, I have no concerns about his cognitive ability. Okay, so I trust Dr. Ronnie Jackson. I don't see any, I mean, he's sweating up a storm under the lights. I don't know any pressure or anything like that, but I have no reason to believe that at all. So, well, that conversation is over. Now, that leads to the next question. I'm not sure that this was a smart thing for Donald Trump to do. Because if you remember, one of his outs is, oh, golly gee, did you catch me with money laundering for the Russians? I guess I have early set dementia. That's why I was saying the stupid things I was. I gotta go. Doctor tells me I gotta go. That's the old Vincent the Chin Gigante excuse, walking around in a bathrobe saying, no, don't put me in prison because I've lost my mind. Well, you just took that excuse away. And I'm not sure that was a smart move. So I'm definitely worried about this, and I'll tell you why. Because I didn't believe it, and if you watched the show, I have called him stupid 1,000, 2,000, 12,000 times, and he is monstrously stupid. But I never really believed the dementia stuff. That one thing that was mentioned in the book was that they said he had trouble remembering his old friend's name at Mar-a-Lago, and I was like, that's the only anecdote I've ever heard, and that's kind of weak. That him not being able to find the limo, never believed in it, never covered it on the show. So, and people might get angry at that. But look, it turns out, he doesn't have dementia. He's just stupid. That's a totally different thing. But once you take that excuse away and that escape hatch away, and if Mueller catches him with something really significant, well, then this is actually not good news for the country, because there goes the release valve. So that means Trump is more likely to get entrenched and fight. Oof, and that could be a mess. So I really wish he hadn't done this. I'm happy for him that he's got good health. But whether it's for progressives or more importantly for Trump and his allies, they've just taken the Alzheimer's excuse off the table. Not sure that was a good idea. Okay, so that could be a lot more relevant than we realize. All right, now let's go beat up Democrats. So yesterday on the show, I got a little animated about how the Democrats are botching the DACA fight. So that's the DREAM Act. That's for the young kids who were brought into the country and didn't have a say on whether they were coming in or not. They've lived almost their whole lives here in America. And even though they're undocumented, they have shown some degree of success. There's 800,000 of them, and this is the only country they've known. So the country is united on it. 70% of Americans believe that they should be allowed to stay. That's the DREAM Act. And in fact, a majority of Trump voters believe they should be able to stay. And so one of the points I made on the show was, one, Democrats should fight harder. And what does that mean? Well, you should insist on a clean DREAM Act because you have the American people on your side. And if it means a government shutdown, the Republicans control the entirety of the government, the House, Senate, and the White House. So they would be blamed for the shutdown. This is a position of incredible strength. And if you don't use this strength as leverage, well, then you're never, ever going to fight back. And it turns out even Republicans agree with me. So Joe Scarborough, who is a former Republican congressman and definitely right-wing, yes, he's upset at Donald Trump, but he is definitely right-wing, has been his whole life. And Morning Joe is pretty much the thoughts of the establishment in a lot of ways. Mike Barnichel's on there. I don't know what he claims his politics are, but these are, very standard conventional wisdom thinkers. And even they are going, wow, the Democrats are so weak. If they don't fight on this, what will they fight on? Now, I have a theory as to why they're not fighting, but I want to share it with you after the clip. First of all, look at the state of affairs when former Republicans and the leaders of conventional wisdom, even they agreed the Democrats are weak. Watch.
And I'm going to talk to Democrats here because we've been tough with Republicans. If you're a Democrat and you do anything to help this president who has sounded racist and Republicans who have attacked Dick Durbin, questioned his integrity, questioned his honesty. If you were a Democrat and do anything to help the government, help Republicans keep the government open without attaching a clean DACA bill to it, then you don't deserve to be in the majority this year, at the end of this year, because you're too weak. Democrats have to go after them. They were attacked. The president was racist. In his remarks, he's now attacked the Congressional Black Caucus and basically said they're jokes. They've called Dick Durbin a liar. You make them pay for that. And while you're making them pay for that, you also do what's good for America, and you get the dreamers. You get a deal for the dreamers, or you don't give Republicans a single vote. They own Congress. If they can't keep the government open, the voters will blame Republicans, not Democrats.
Well, Joe, if they don't do that, they're clearly in the wrong business, because they don't understand when they're playing from a position of sheer strength, which is what they are now, because they're playing up against the president. You just described it, and you just described the situation that the Democrats are in as opposed to the weakened Republicans because of the president.
So look at all that they're saying. First of all, there's Joe Scarborough, former Republican congressman, clearly right wing, saying if Democrats won't fight for progressives, for progressive positions, then they're monumentally weak. Mike Barnicle explains they're in a position of sheer strength, yet they are hesitant to use it. So what explains this? Well, there's two factors, and they are similar. So one is that, well, 2.5. Let's tackle the half first. So part of where the Democrats get their money is unions. And so there's a lot of government workers, and government workers will vote Democrat. They also are in a lot of unions. So those guys go, no, don't shut the government down. Don't. Okay. Well, how about using it as leverage for progressive victories? Yeah. But I work for the government, or I work for this union, so that's their problem, not my problem. Don't do it. So let's keep it real. That's one of the issues here. But the next big issue is corporate donors overall. Because if you shut the government down, what happens? You want to know what happens? The markets go down. Nope. No donor, Republican or Democrat, wants that to happen. So they tell all their guys, now Trump they can't control, but they tell the Democrats, hey, look, that guy's out of control. There's nothing you can do about it, so you better bow your head, because I will not risk the markets. All of our money's in the markets. So that's the thing they never, ever talk about on television, almost never talk about it in print media either. Those corporate donors tell them, under no circumstance do you ever threaten our precious, precious market where we have all of our money. So that's why you think they're weak. You're like, well, how in the world could you not see your position of strength? Because they don't actually have that position of strength. Because they are told by their bosses, hey, I don't care what you think you can get. I don't care if you have 70% popularity on this issue. I don't care if you think you could win elections in 2018. I don't care if you win the election. I care that the market doesn't go down. You will not shut the government down. And they tell all of them, and that is why a huge reason why the Democrats do not fight. They're ordered not to fight. And then one last thing about the weakness. What do donors want? If they want lower taxes and they want deregulation, which all helps their bottom line, and they want lower wages for their workers, which also helps their bottom line. They want really strong Republicans who insist on deregulating and lower taxes, especially for corporations. Kind of like what we have now. And they want a controlled opposition who is going to say, oh, golly gee, don't do that. Oh, they got the tax cuts again. Well, I guess there's nothing we can do, right? Oh, don't do this, don't do that. Well, there is something you can do. You can shut the government down. Oh, no, we're not going to do that. We're not going to do that. You could do this or that to block the efforts of the Republicans. They blocked your Supreme Court nominee for a year, and it seemed like they couldn't do that, but they did do that. What you need, if you are really wealthy, powerful corporate donors, is really weak Democrats. A controlled opposition that'll constantly tell you there's nothing we can do. So there's 330 million people in the country. If you want to fund strong progressives, well, you could find plenty of strong progressives to fund. If you want to find weak Democrats, there's plenty of weak Democrats to find. And so the magic trick is in the pre-selection. So they don't have to write Democratic leaders a memo telling them, hey, remember to be weak cowards and always give it to Republicans. Now do your job. They don't have to say that because they already funded the weak Democrats and propelled them and told everybody else, don't primary them. That wouldn't be unity. Don't primary them. We already pre-selected them to cower when the strong Republicans we also funded come in. And that's what they do. So that's why even Scarborough and Barnacle are like, gee, well, how could the Democrats be this weak? It's unbelievable. It's not unbelievable. They're paid to lose. They're paid to be that weak. That is what our institutionalized corruption and legalized bribery has led to. So don't be surprised the next time you see it. You will keep on seeing it until small donor-based, uncorrupted progressives actually defeat the corrupted corporate Democrats. If you don't defeat them, they will keep, oh golly gee, accidentally losing to Republicans, even ones as monstrous and unpopular as Donald Trump. They're losing to a guy who's sitting at a 32% popularity rating. How is that possible? The only way that it's possible is if that's not an accident, if that's not something they failed to defeat, if it's part of the plan. And even them, they might not know that it's the plan. Again, it doesn't have to be in a smoke-filled room. It could be that they got selected because they are pathetically weak, and those donors had a sense they would never fight back, so the Republicans can give corporations and the rich and powerful everything they ever wanted. Kind of like what's been happening for the last 40 years. Okay. I got to take a break, and when we come back, we are going to get to the Department of Homeland Security Secretary. She doesn't know if Norway is white or not. Well, we'll look into it and tell you what's going on when we return.
Hey, Dave. As you can probably see, Skype froze. Froze and crashed.
You know, I'm watching that documentary on the Vietnam War, and there was a TV journalist in the middle of some tiny little village in Vietnam doing live TV as the soldiers were burning the Vietnamese huts, and it didn't crash. And that was 1965, and he was in Vietnam.
All right, back on the Young Turks. I'm gonna read a couple tweets for you guys. Skepticus Rex says, as an artist, if I was commissioned to create a grotesque slug alien wearing human skin suit to hide among us, Bannon is pretty much what I would draw. But you know what? I'm gonna be fair and disagree. Because it'd be too obvious. Wouldn't you, like if you're an alien hiding, wouldn't you want to take a non-alien look to you? Maybe you look good or something. Anyway, I live in a glass house, so I'm gonna move on. Rian Chambers says, I guess TYT Live had another joke that wasn't gonna land because they allowed Cenk to tell another dad joke. Ladies and gentlemen, the joke has landed. Look, the Hope Floats thing doesn't even make any sense. Okay, so that one didn't even land. The loose Bannon, yeah, that one landed. Okay, that's my own assessment. Bitchy Gay Guy says, wait, Trump's blood pressure is better than mine? I'm a 35-year-old granola eating vegan. What the fuck? Well, that is genetics partly. It's partly what you do, what you eat, how much you exercise. In fact, my doctor always tells me what the fuck. He's like, you look like a mess. And there's no reason in the world why you should be healthy, but apparently you are. And finally, Carl says, I would not doubt that Bannon has already started talks for a book at this point. That's a great point by Carl, because I don't know if he's going to turn evidence against Trump with Mueller or the House Intelligence Committee, but he's got no way to make money left, or more importantly, I think he still has the Seinfeld money. He has and Goldman Sachs money, but he doesn't really have a way to make an impact anymore other than a book. So it would be shocking if he didn't do one. Okay, so and that one ought to be a doozy. So let's go forward. I got some more stories for you guys. Okay. The Secretary of Department of Homeland Security testified in front of Congress, and boy, she had some interesting and amusing excuses for Donald Trump's behavior. Her name is Kristen Nielsen, and she was questioned by a lot of the senators, many of whom were frustrated. Let's start with Dick Durbin, who was in the infamous meeting where Donald Trump made the shithole comments, and Durbin is the one who actually called him out on in the first place, where the president called Haiti, some Latin American countries, and all of the African countries shitholes. So here's the exchange back and forth.
What do you remember the president saying about immigration from African countries to the United States?
What I heard him saying was that he'd like to move away from a country-based quota system to a merit-based system. So it shouldn't matter where you're from, it should matter what you can contribute to the United States.
How did he characterize those countries in Africa?
I don't specifically remember a categorization of countries in Africa. I think what he was saying is, as far as best I could tell, and as you know, there were about a dozen people in the room, there were a lot of cross conversations, there was a lot of rough talk by a lot of people in the room. But what I understood him to be saying is, let's move away from the countries and let's look at the individual and make sure that those we bring here can contribute to our society.
What I understood him to be saying, not what he said, what I understood him to be saying is, let's look away from the countries and look at the individuals. But he didn't actually say that at all. In fact, he said the opposite. He said, why are we letting these countries in, which he described as shithole countries? And he said about the Haitians, take them out. He said, why don't we let people from Norway in? But that's not person-based, and that's not merit-based, as she said. That's country-based. I like Norwegians. I don't like these other countries. Let's let those guys in. Fairly clear. She said, I don't specifically remember what he said when he was talking his rough talk. Now you know the excuse they're using, right? Well, the president didn't necessarily say shithole, so that's why it's fake news. He might have just said shit house. Oh my God, why didn't you say that from the beginning? Well, that sounds lovely. All right, more of this nonsense.
Do you remember the president saying expressly, I want more Europeans, why can't we have more immigrants from Norway?
I do remember him asking about the concept of underrepresented countries as a fix. This was in the conversation about removing the diversity lottery and how we could reallocate that. And I do remember him asking, if we do that and we then assign those to countries that are unrepresented, aren't we just continuing non-merit-based immigration?
So the last part is what gets under my skin. So underrepresented countries. Well, look, part of the reason that And Norway does have far greater wealth than, for example, Haiti. That's of course true, right? But part of the reason we don't have as much immigrants coming in from Norway is because they have much greater wealth. They're doing fine in Norway. In fact, they've got universal health care. They've got a much more progressive government. They're generally way happier than here. That's based on actual studies. And Northern European countries are generally pretty happy. And they're also overall astoundingly liberal. So they don't want to come here to this draconian system where we have, free market run amok with no regulations, et cetera, and great wealth disparity. That's part of the reason why we're not as happy as Northern Europe. But so it's, when the Irish came over to America, they didn't come over because they're like, hey, you know what? Everything's going great in Ireland. We're all really, really rich. You guys want to leave our mansions and go over to America? No, they had the great potato famine. They were dying and they had to go look for a new hope. That's what we were, America, and that's what we have been for immigrants. And if we had stopped them and said, okay, we want a merit-based system. We only want, what merit based on what? The Irish that came in were amazing for America. The Italians that came in that were dirt poor were amazing for America. The Jews and blacks and Latinos and all these different races that have come in have been terrific for America and have built America. A lot of them with their bare hands. And they didn't come because they were already rich. What other merit will you use? Or are you going to make them take the SATs? What are we doing here? Taking an IQ test? We've never done that. Give us your huddled masses. They're coming for a dream and they're hungry. That's why they made America great, because they were hungry to do better. In the case of the Irish, literally, there was a famine going on. So this whole idea of, oh, let's do a merit-based system, it just means let's let rich white people in. It's gross. That's not what America is. We want people who are driven to find a better life and to live the American dream. Okay, so one more from her.
You said on Fox News that the president used strong language. What was that strong language?
Let's see, strong language, there was, apologies, I don't remember specific word. What I was struck with, frankly, as I'm sure you were as well, was just the general profanity that was used in the room by almost everyone.
Did you hear me use profanity?
No, sir, neither did I.
Did you hear Senator Graham use profanity?
I did hear tough language from Senator Graham, yes, sir.
What did he say?
He used tough language. He was impassioned. I think he was feeling very strongly about the issue, as was everyone in the room. And to underscore a point, I think he was using some strong language.
Do you recall that the strong language he used repeated exactly what the president had said prior to that?
I remember specific cuss words being used by a variety of members.
Just say it. Just say it. We all know what he said. What does rough talk mean? Right? So again, what's the difference between shithole and shithouse? It doesn't matter. Rough talk isn't like, boy, I am vexed. It's not, I rough talk him and run him off. Right? Old school TYT reference, yeet, yeet. Okay, so no, that means curse words. Curse words like shithole. Just say, I thought that conservatives were real tough guys. They're like, oh, we're gonna call it like it is. We like Donald Trump because he tells it like it is, he just says it, right? All of a sudden, I guess he's scared. I guess that's your big, bold leader and all of his allies. They're scared. They admit that it was rough talk. So you know that he was cursing. You know he was denigrating them. You know he was putting them down. So I guess they're just too scared to say the actual words. What happened? I thought you guys were tough guys. No. He wants credit from his base, but he doesn't want to alienate everybody else. Oh, that sounds like a standard politician. Interesting. Okay, but I'm not done with Nielsen yet because I am greatly amused by her and others. Okay, so here we go. So Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, Kristen Nielsen, is testifying in front of the Senate. Pat Leahy, Senator Leahy from Vermont, is going to ask her a very, very normal standard question. She's going to give an amusing answer. Let's watch.
Norway is a predominantly white country, isn't it?
I actually do not know that, sir, but I imagine that is the case.
Okay.
I got news for you. Yeah, they are. Okay, here, in fact, I'll show you the numbers. We bothered to look them up. Norway is 83.2% Norwegian, otherwise known as white, 8.3% other European, which is otherwise known as largely white, and 8.5% other. So that's about 91% white. And by the way, the other might also have plenty of white countries as well. But of course, Norway Norway's white, of course. What do you think Norway is? Like, but they can't help themselves. They're greasy politicians. And they have to lie and bend the truth and say, I don't know that Norway's white. I haven't looked into it. By the way, you're working at Homeland Security. Maybe you should look into it. That's kind of your job. Aren't we doing extreme vetting, or do we not do extreme vetting of white countries? So that's why you never looked into it. Okay. Anyway, now we're going to go to Republican Senator Joni Ernst. Okay, so she's in Iowa. By the way, it's not like the room is full of minorities, as you'll see. Okay, she makes another excuse about Norway, and look at the reaction.
Ernst telling the crowd other world leaders support Trump.
He is standing up for a lot of the countries where we have seen.
Name a few. Could you name a few?
Yeah, you bet. Norway is one of them. No, well, okay. How many of you think? You laugh, but folks, who borders Norway? Russia.
And I don't know what that means. That's a group of good old American white folks from Iowa laughing their ass off at their Senator Joni Ernst. And she's like, I mean, somebody had to stick up for Norway. Somebody had to do it. Poor Norway. They're always getting abused. Norway's doing perfectly fine. They didn't need Trump to stand up for them. And by the way, they are far, far more progressive than we are, and are probably annoyed that Trump is claiming them as among his folk, because they're not his folk politically at all. The only reason why he mentioned Norway is because, and I'll apparently have to fill in the secretary here, Secretary Nielsen, because they are largely white. That is true. Okay. All right. Fun for everybody. Now, next story. Jim Acosta is at CNN, and we've got this whole controversy about Donald Trump calling Haiti and African countries shitholes, and then saying we need to have more people in from Norway. Now, it's a fair question as to why he might have picked out Norway as his example of the good countries, especially given that the president largely doesn't agree with Norwegian politics, which are far more liberal. So Acosta wanted to address that question at the White House, and for his efforts, he was shown the door. Let's watch.
Mr. President, did you say that you want more people to come in from Norway? Did you say that you wanted more people to come in from Norway? Is that true, Mr. President?
I want them to come in from everywhere, everywhere. Thank you very much, everybody.
Just Caucasian or white countries, sir, or do you want people to come in from other parts of the world where there are people of color?
Jim, thank you.
And not sure if you can hear the end of that there, Wolf, but as I tried to ask whether he wanted more people to come in just from white or Caucasian countries, he said out. He pointed at me and said out, as in get out of the Oval Office.
I don't know if you saw it. You could rewind. Acosta, Trump goes out, and Acosta goes. You didn't see that coming. Getting kicked out of the White House for asking a question. And just for a second, we're going to go on with how Acosta got kicked out. And this is not how a democracy that believes in the First Amendment and freedom of the press is supposed to act. But also on the substance of the question, I want people from everywhere, except Haiti, all of Africa, El Salvador, and I can go on and on. The countries that you called shitholes, you said about Haiti, you said, let's get them out. About Nigeria, in an earlier conversation, not even this one, he had said, why would we let them in? If they come here, they'll stay. They won't want to go back to their huts in Africa. I'm not convinced that you want people from everywhere. And by the way, if you do, I got good news for you. You're the president. You can make that happen tomorrow. Strike a deal with the Democrats, have a new policy. Oh, right, you don't want people from everywhere. You just want them from countries like Norway. Gee, I wonder why. Okay, so Acosta's going to give you more details here.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Just Caucasian or white countries, sir, or do you want people to come in from other parts of the world where there are people of color?
Jim, thank you.
Okay, so before we get to Acosta's details, I like that because Jared Jackson, our producer, always does like a Zapruder film like analysis of what happened. Out. So that one was clear. Now let's go to Acosta's explanation.
After that, we went into the Roosevelt Room inside the White House where he and the president of Kazakhstan made some pretty lengthy remarks, and then at the conclusion of those remarks, we attempted to ask the president more questions about this controversy, and it was at that point, Wolf, I have to underline, I've never encountered anything like this before at the White House. The Deputy Press Secretary, Hogan Gidley, and a wrangler, press wrangler over here at the White House got basically right up in my face and the faces of other pool reporters here at the White House and started shouting so loudly that it was impossible for the president to hear our questions or even see that we were trying to ask questions. It was that kind of a display. It reminded me of something that you might see in less democratic countries when people at the White House or officials of a foreign government attempt to get in the way of the press in doing their jobs. But essentially that is what just happened a few moments ago here. They were so determined to block us from asking questions that they got right up in our face and started shouting, "No questions, no questions," so the president could make an exit from the Roosevelt room without taking any questions. Wolf.
It's a really serious issue, but I do have to make a couple of goofy comments. Has Wolf Blitzer ever had a facial expression? It is amazing how stoic he remains in every interview ever for the last 20, 30 years. Okay, now onto the substance. The president doesn't really believe in the Constitution. Freedom of the press, he thinks, is an annoyance and one he'd like to get rid of. And he said it a billion different times. He's about to do some stupid fake news awards. He is openly hostile to the press. Look, you want to fight back against press that you think is biased? That's totally fair. Trying to shut down the press, threatening their broadcast license as he did with NBC, threatening mergers as he's doing with Time Warner and AT&T. You might have different issues with that merger, and I do. But him saying on the record that he's going to look into it because he doesn't agree with CNN, those are massive, actual First Amendment issues. Now, not letting reporters ask questions, that's not what America stands for. All right, but I can't help it. You know Trump. He was probably like, "Oh, president of Kazakhstan, great, I can't wait to meet Borat." He's probably profoundly disappointed. That's why he wanted to wrap it up as soon as possible. All right, anyways, I'm a bad man. We're gonna take a quick break here. And remember how I promised you good news for progressives? That's coming up next.
Congratulations to you, the Young Turks, and other digital media for breaking through barriers in providing information to people that we don't see on corporate television.
A really great idea that you had. And you noticed that mainstream press had no interest in covering this policy. They didn't want to talk about Medicare for all for whatever reason.
Well, we know what the reason is. We know it's not whatever reason. You turn on television today, what are you going to see? The pharmaceutical industry running these crazy ads. I would be nervous about taking these drugs with all of the side effects, but that's another story.
Right.
But they are dependent on advertising from the pharmaceutical industry and the insurance companies.
You're right. And, just as our politicians are bought, mainstream media is experiencing the same type of corruption. So there is a way to get around that, and that is independent media.
Really, for the first time, I think, we are going to have a town meeting devoted toward a better understanding of what Medicare for all is, to answer some of the very good questions that you raised. We're going to hear from physicians, we hear from economists, we'll hear from people who may be critical of the idea and listen to their concerns. But we will spend a significant amount of time talking about why the United States is the only major country on earth not to guarantee health care to all, while we spend twice as much per capita for a dysfunctional healthcare system. So that's one thing. But here's the second thing that excites me very much, is I have believed for a very, very long time that not that corporate media is fake news. That's not what it's about. It's not that they lie about this or that. But there are major areas where, for a variety of reasons, mostly economic, they choose not to focus. All right? They're not going to focus too much about income and wealth inequality because the people who own their networks are in the 1%. And they're not going to focus on an issue like Medicare for all because of their dependency on pharmaceutical industry advertising and insurance company advertising. This could be the very first step in bringing millions of people into serious discussion about the serious issues facing our country with the time that we need to really go into depth about them. So I want to thank the Young Turks
All right, back on the Young Turks. Chelsea Charles writes in, by the way, use hashtag TYT live on the show while the show is live to talk to us. We're going to do Aziz Ansari controversy in the next segment. I imagine there'll be a lot of tweets about that. Hashtag TYT live. And by the way, whenever you're watching the show, sharing is caring. So share on Facebook, YouTube, or wherever else you're viewing. Chelsea Charles writes in on Twitter, she tried so hard, referring to Nielsen, to not make him look like a racist idiot. No one would ever believe he said that. I mean, you're right. She made it sound so much more sophisticated. The president is trying to move away from a country-based system to a merit-based system. He didn't say any of that. He said, I like people from Norway, not from Haiti. Don Migueletto writes in, for years I've been saying the discourse in DC has sunk to the level of professional wrestling. Turns out it's more than a discourse. Democrats are now jabronis, paid to lose. That is a great way of putting it. I never thought about it that way. Not in the paid to lose, but the jabroni analogy. So maybe I'll start calling them jabronis from now on. Nice job. Okay, by the way, just a quick shout out to one of our sponsors, aspiration.com. They're the non-bank bank. So if you put your money in there, number one, you're gonna get 1% interest rate. Good luck. Go look around. Go look around everywhere to see if you can find a bank with a 1% interest rate. You won't be able to. They have that. And they don't allow for any of their investment funds to go to fossil fuel, firearms, private prisons, and they don't invest in oil. So they're a clean, progressive institution, and they give away 10% of their revenue to charity, which is unreal. So you do right, you've got your money in a clean place, and you're actually making the most amount of money from there. So I love progressive companies like that. That's why they're one of our sponsors. All right, let's go over here and talk about net neutrality. I got good news for you, okay? Now, in net neutrality, we had very bad news recently. Ajit Pai, the head of the FCC, led a charge to get rid of net neutrality, which means that now we don't have freedom on the internet, and the internet service providers like Verizon, AT&T, and Comcast can control how fast or slow the different websites are, how much they can charge different people. They're not mandated to treat everyone equally or to treat each website equally. So the only thing that they have as their guide is to maximize their own profit. So they could do that any way they like. So that could obviously lead to a disastrous dismantling of the internet for their benefit, not for our benefit. So some folks in Congress have decided to fight back. Some good news on that front. The Hill reports Senate Democrats have put together 50 votes for a measure meant to block the Federal Communications Commission's December decision to end net neutrality rules put in place by the Obama administration. Of course, they don't have the tiebreaker in the Senate, the Republicans do, so they're gonna need one more vote, they explain here. Democrats are just one GOP vote shy of the 51 vote threshold for a Senate resolution of disapproval, which would strike down the FCC's December rule changes. So, super important. Now, don't get too excited. There's a huge caveat there in a second. But Ed Markey, Senator from Massachusetts, is leading the charge here. He's been fantastic on this issue. I beat up on the Democrats all the time, rightfully so, but credit where credit is due, and Senator Markey is doing a wonderful job in fighting for freedom on the internet. And it doesn't matter if you're a conservative or a liberal, probably right-wing sites would be the first targeted if there were any issues of corporations wanting to clean things up and make the internet more safe, right? So Markey fighting for all Americans there, and he has gotten some Republicans to join, including Susan Collins, but he does need one more colleague to come to that side to win in the Senate. But the measure, if it passes the Senate, faces a murky future, as it would have to pass the GOP-held House and get President Trump's signature to go into effect. So there's still plenty of hurdles, and obviously the biggest one being Donald Trump. But look, this is how you build momentum. If it winds up passing in the Senate, at least they're moving it. Then you go to the House and you might be surprised that there might be some degree of bipartisan agreement there as well. Whether it's enough to win in the House is a different question. But even if you don't win in the House, you set it up for a vote after the 2018 elections. You use it as an election issue, you rout the Republicans, and then you bring in new congressmen who will vote in the opposite direction. And if you build up enough momentum, yes, you could even override the veto of the president. So at a minimum, they're at least on the road. Now, Look, a lot of this has to be done within 60 days to get rid of a regulation. Is it going to get done in 60 days where you win in the Senate? Yes, you can win in the Senate in 60 days. You just need one more brave Republican or one funded by the internet companies. Let's keep it real. The reason we have a fighting chance here is because we also have giant companies on our side. So they have Verizon, Comcast, AT&T, et cetera. And the good guys have Facebook, Google, Netflix, who don't want to take away net neutrality. Look, I don't care why they're on the right side. I just care that they are. And by the way, to be fair and open and honest, the Young Turks have business dealings with almost all of those companies. So on both sides. But in this case, the internet companies want to keep freedom on the internet, and almost the entirety of the internet agrees. There's a couple of people pretending to be in favor of protecting the internet, but want to hand it over to those private corporations, but they haven't really convinced the right wing either. Good luck, Ted Cruz, keep trying. By the way, Ted, if there's no freedom on the internet, you might not be able to watch the accidental porn you tweeted out the other day. I'm just saying. So finally, I want to go to Ed Markey for one last quote on this. He says, Republicans now have a clear choice. Be on the right side of history and stand with the American people who support a free and open internet, or hold hands with the special interests who want to control the internet for their own profit. Well, that's nearly a perfect description of what's going on here. And I don't have to spend too much time convincing you guys because, like I said, right wing, left wing, in the middle, almost the entire internet agrees. Yes, we would like to have freedom on the internet. The only people who don't agree are the corrupt politicians who have taken money from the internet service providers. And with those legalized bribes, they've decided, no, we'd rather give the internet away to them so they can make more money and give us more legalized bribes. Perhaps we shouldn't base our elections on private financing. They might wind up working for private interests. Think about it, wolf-pack.com. Get money out of politics. Let's go back to democracy and actually have real debates over the issues and not have the corruption we have now. Okay, so now one last story for you guys in this hour. Then we go to Ansari. Like I said, God help us. All right, more good news. So believe it or not, there's some good news coming out of the redistricting issues at the state level. So now you know part of the problem in democracy is the insane gerrymandering. That's where they draw these maps that wind up all around the state and go, okay, now I've sliced and diced the state in a way that is maniacal, that doesn't match the geography at all, but helps me keep the state in either one political party or the other. By the way, both parties do this. And Republicans happen to do it more, but I'll give you some context on that in a second too. First of all, last week we heard from North Carolina. In case you didn't hear about that, I want you to know about it because it's super important. Then I'll tell you about what happened in Pennsylvania today. Judge James A. Wynn Jr. Said that Republicans in North Carolina's legislature had been motivated by invidious partisan intent as they carried out their obligation in 2016 to divide the state into 13 congressional districts, 10 of which are held by Republicans. The result, Judge Wynn wrote, violated the 14th Amendment's guarantee of equal protection. Of course, when he wrote that they were motivated by invidious partisan intent, Donald Trump said, what? Okay, so let's break this down. North Carolina at this point is a purple state. They voted for Trump in the last election, but they voted for a Democratic governor. And last election before that, they voted for Barack Obama. So they're close to 50-50, they could go either way. But the way that the Republicans drew up the map, they get 10 out of the 13 seats. It's outrageous. It's obviously not representative of the people of North Carolina. They want democracy. You should want democracy that is representative of you. Instead, they stole your representatives and they did it based on partisan advantage. Now, if you're a Republican going, oh yeah, that's awesome, man, I love when we cheat. Who cares about democracy? Be careful what you wish for. You have the same problem in Maryland, except the Democrats have taken advantage. And they are getting a disproportionate number of seats based on the voting patterns of Maryland. Now, on either side, you shouldn't want it. You should want the voters to actually get real representatives. Well, one more quote from Judge Wynn in that regard. He said, a wealth of evidence proves the General Assembly's intent to subordinate the interests of the non-Republican voters and entrench Republican domination of the state's congressional delegation. So look, that's really important because you remember Bush v. Gore, that was in the year 2000, and the Supreme Court said, no, look, the 14th Amendment is really important, and we have to make sure that every vote is equal. It's a nationwide election, so I don't want Florida setting different rules than the other states, so I don't care about their recount. I'm gonna end their recount. I don't even want them to recount the vote. By the way, when the press organizations recounted the vote in Florida, it turns out Al Gore had not just won the popular vote, he had won the Electoral College. He had won the state of Florida. So that's why the Republicans in the Supreme Court blocked that. And it began I don't know that it began it, but it certainly cemented the corruption of the Supreme Court. But they claimed they cared so much about the 14th Amendment and make sure that everything is equal. Well, then you would certainly care about the 14th Amendment in this context to make sure that one vote, one man, one vote principle of America is protected, right? And by the way, now the Supreme Court is looking at this at a federal level as well. Now let's go to Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania Supreme Court will hear oral argument on Wednesday in a case alleging the state's 2011 congressional map drawn by Republicans violates protections on freedom of expression and equal protection in the state's constitution. Similar idea, wait till you get a load of their map in a second, but also good point here. They're like, look, we're not just guided by the US Constitution. In Pennsylvania, we're also guided by the Pennsylvania Constitution, which actually has enshrined democracy even more protections and in a better way, and saying that, hey, you're violating Pennsylvania's Constitution here with the outrageous gerrymandered map that you have. So to give you a sense of that, since 2012, Republicans have consistently been able to win 13 of the state's 18 congressional seats, despite winning only 50% of the statewide vote. God, man, that is outrageous. They have 50% of the vote, and in a democracy, they should have 50% of the seats. They're like, nope, we cheated. We drew the map in a way that even though we get 50% of the vote, we're gonna get 13 out of the 18 seats. That's not democracy, that's not America. Yes, this is when the courts are supposed to step in and say, that is not constitutional, that is not one man, one vote. Now, Michael Lee, an expert here, explains, win in Pennsylvania would suggest that advocates may have been overlooking the state constitutions, many of which, like Pennsylvania's, have more expansive and robust rights and protections than federal constitution. A win in Pennsylvania could open the door to more state court litigation. Now, again, this is a bipartisan issue. This term, the Supreme Court will also hear a First Amendment challenge to Maryland's congressional map, which benefits Democrats. And I'm not in favor of Maryland's map either. I want democracy, call me crazy. And finally, one more here from Sam Levine at HuffPost. Drawing the electoral map, he explains, they say is always going to be intertwined with politics, and courts have never intervened to set a standard for how much politics can factor into redrawing district lines. And I want you to have that context. Yes, in the past, the courts have been very reluctant to get involved in drawing of the political maps, because they say that is a political question. And yes, according to our system, they're supposed to leave that to the representatives. But now the representatives are no longer representative. So that is when the courts are supposed to protect the Constitution and our system of government and step in and say that's unconstitutional. You need to find a system that is not this unfair, that robs all of these people in Maryland, Pennsylvania, Michigan, North Carolina of their right to their vote and to equal representation. So at least we're on that road. I hope we arrive at that conclusion for all of our sakes. All right, I gotta take a quick break here. When we come back, Aziz Ansari charged with, well, I'm not quite sure what he's charged with, but certainly doing the wrong thing in a sexual relationship by an anonymous source. Is he right? Is she right? Well, we're gonna have a tough conversation about that when we return.
Do you recall that the strong language he used repeated exactly what the president had said prior to that?
I remember specific cuss words being used by a variety of members.
Say it! Say it!
All right, back on the Young Turks, Cenk Uygur, Anna Kasparian with you guys. Stephen writes in, well, Trump doesn't read the things he signs, so there's a chance he could let it pass about the net neutrality legislation. I Am Sock says, I'd wager Trump and Comcast have around the same approval rating. There's a good chance. And Jeremy Kohler says, this version of the Republican Party has never been on the right side of history. Net neutrality will likely be the same. Hopefully I'm wrong. Well, I share your skepticism about the Republican Party, but I also hope you're wrong. We'll see if they do the right thing. Don't hold your breath, but let's keep fighting for it. Members of the day are Michael Vandalos and Claudia Nogueira. There's no way I said that right. So Michael and Claudia, thank you so much. We appreciate you being members, supporting independent media, and letting us do what we do. That's tytnetwork.com/join, and you get the whole 2-hour show. Download it or podcast it without the ads anytime you like. So I've been promising the Ansari story, but I see we actually have a third in the rundown here.
We have a third.
Okay, I'm not trying to reach a matter, you guys.
We're definitely going to get to that story, I promise you, especially because that's the story that I did. I read like an insane amount of perspectives on it just to make sure that I was fully informed before I gave my perspective. So. All
right, great. All right, let's get going though.
All right. A 39-year-old man by the name of Jorge Garcia has been deported back to Mexico. Now, what makes this story a little fascinating, extremely fascinating, is the fact that Jorge Garcia has no criminal record. He has been living in the United States for more than 30 years, and he was actually brought to the United States when he was only 10 years old. His aunt actually brought him to the US, and he had an undocumented status, which he tried to get fixed back in 2005, but unfortunately, the lawyer that he was working with filed the wrong documents and actually got him into more trouble than, helping his situation.
Why don't we deport that guy?
So this is a devastating story because not only was Jorge Garcia a productive member of society, he worked as a landscaper and had no criminal record. He was also married to a US citizen and had 2 children here in the United States, 2 teenagers ages 15 and 12. Now, the story that we're about to show you, the video we're about to show you, gives you a sense of how emotional this is, but it also shows you the ramifications of a broken immigration system and promises that went unkept by Trump, who claimed that he would not target people like Garcia. Take a look.
This is a goodbye that just doesn't make a hell of a lot of sense. This is a father saying goodbye to his wife and 2 teenage children. His name is Jorge Garcia. He was brought to the United States by his parents when he was 10 years old. Today, after living and working here for 30 years, Jorge Garcia was deported to Mexico. His wife, Cindy, says he has no criminal record, he has paid his taxes, and that he is a good man.
He is a good man. Again, has not broken any laws. The only thing that was working against him was the fact that he was brought here when he was 10 years old by his aunt, actually. And his parents were already here in the United States.
Can I just say a couple things? First, great video that CNN got there. We'll have the full link to that in the description box below if you're watching on YouTube. And I want to make sure you guys saw that because this is what we voted for. I want you to see it with your own eyes. And we're breaking up families. And look, I've heard from people they're now hiding people in basements to make sure that ICE doesn't get them. So that's where we are today in America. And I can give you my own personal context on this. He was 10 when he was brought over. I was 8 when I came over as a legal immigrant, okay? Now, so I've been in this country now for almost 40 years. And this is where I grew up, this is my culture. If you brought me back to Turkey and put me there, I don't know what I would do. So I'm barely fluent in Turkish, but I don't know what job I would have. I'm pretty sure I could be a Turkish talk show host, right? I mean, what do you do? What do you do? The guys, and so when you grow up here, this is your country, this is your culture. I grew up on the Pittsburgh Steelers and subs and pepperoni pizza, and so did he, right? And all the other things that come along with it. He grew up on Seinfeld, not telenovelas, right? So you're taking somebody and saying, I don't care where you grew up, I don't care what kind of family you have, what your roots are, how much you think you're American, you're never gonna be like us.
And by doing this, of course you punish Garcia, who again did nothing wrong, right? Yeah, he was brought here when he was 10 years old and as a result had this undocumented status, but you're also punishing his kids, his wife. I mean, he is providing for his family, he's working as a landscaper. He's not doing anything wrong. His family's not doing anything wrong. They're law-abiding citizens who went to authorities and tried to get this all sorted out back in 2005. And unfortunately, luck of the draw, they ended up with a terrible attorney who filed the wrong paperwork. But he was checking in with ICE on a yearly basis. He was following their rules, he was complying with whatever it is that they needed to see from him. And at the end, all it took was the election of one guy who has weaponized the issue of immigration to destroy this family's life like this. And he's gonna go to Mexico to do what? He's been in the United States since he's been 10. He's 39 years old. What is he gonna do in Mexico?
So, and they don't care about that. But look, I don't wanna let Republican voters off the hook and other conservative pundits. Remember when, just a couple of days ago, when Trump said that he was likely to do a clean deal for the Dreamers. Now, in his case, Garcia is not a dreamer. He missed that by 2 years too, okay? And so, but when he said he was going to allow those dreamers to stay, which 70% of the country agrees with, and Coulter, Tucker Carlson, Fox News hosts, etc., were in a rage. They want to deport Jorge Garcia. They want to get rid of him. They don't, and they think that's not my family. I don't care. I have no empathy for that guy. Get him out, get him out, get him out. And it's not an accident. So if you're a Trump voter, this is what you wanted, so congratulations. And I'm guarantee you there's a lot of people that are watching this right now who will write it in the comment section like, yes, this was a total victory for them. They ripped apart a Latino family. They've got to be ecstatic about it.
I know, but dare I say those are the most miserable people on the planet, because deporting people like Jorge Garcia is not gonna make your situation better. I get it, there's a lot of pain and suffering out there. There's a lot of financial, hurt out there. There are economic issues out there. I totally understand that. Those are legitimate concerns. But deporting Jorge Garcia is not gonna get you paid better. Deporting Jorge Garcia is not gonna create awesome quality jobs. It's not gonna make sure that your family is better off. We're focusing on the wrong things, and keep in mind that it's your taxpayer money that is being used as a resource to deport law-abiding individuals like Jorge Garcia.
And just own it, man. So look, if you're offended by what I said, that doesn't make any sense. Trump said he was gonna do this, so I guess I'm giving him credit in that sense. And now he's doing it. He said, I'm gonna viciously break up families, and you ecstatically voted for him. So if you don't like that and now you find out, oh, well, that doesn't sound humane, that doesn't sound right, well then don't vote for him or any other Republican that promises to do that. And if you do, you own it, you did that.
It's depressing, but we're gonna see more and more of these stories, as the Trump administration moves forward, and every day there's something new. ICE officials showing up at 7-Elevens throughout the country. ICE officials just recently went to downtown Los Angeles at Grand Central Station to just start harassing anyone who looks like they might not be documented citizens of the United States. And if that's where you want to see your taxpayer money at play, well, congratulations, that's what you got. All right, moving on to some possible good news. Recently, Attorney General Jeff Sessions made it abundantly clear that he didn't care if states had legalized marijuana for recreational use or medicinal use. He wants to utilize the Justice Department to go after states that have legalized marijuana, and he will do so because he feels that federal law trumps state law, and it doesn't matter how voters in your state feel about it. Now, the House of Representatives has sprung into action on this issue. Luckily, they're springing into action on something. And what they're planning on doing is approaching this issue from two possible ways. One possible way is to essentially pass legislation that would protect these states that have legalized marijuana for medicinal or recreational use. Another possibility is attaching this to the spending bill. If they make it clear that the Attorney General or the Justice Department cannot go or use taxpayer money to go after these states, well then it will protect these states temporarily. But I would argue that it's more important to have a standalone bill that passes in Congress.
So look, they're actually taking some action. Look, they're actually taking some action, so I'm definitely in favor of that. And it doesn't mean it's going to pass. It's just 69 House members right now. Obviously, there's 435 people in the House, and so they got a lot of work ahead of them. It's encouraging that it's bipartisan, and part of the reason for that is because now in the states that have legalized, people / corporations have started to make money off of marijuana. And if you got companies making money, guess what you're going to have? Republican politicians on your side. So in the states that have legalized, the Republicans are like, what's going on? Oh, you're giving me a campaign contribution because we legalized? I meant legalized the whole time. What did I say? Not legalized? I meant legalized. Yeah. So now those guys have flipped, and now we have a stronger and stronger coalition.
Yeah, those guys flipped, and I completely agree with you that now they're addicted to the money, right? You know, they're addicted to the campaign donations, no doubt, but also that tax revenue that's coming into the states is wonderful, right? And so it's a great way to regulate and tax a drug that people like to use, and they were using regardless of the prohibition of marijuana. Another thing that I'm curious about, and this is pure speculation, this is a little bit of a goofy point, but hear me out. I think a huge number of our Congress members have used marijuana. And they probably know that this is a ridiculous thing to, prosecute people for or to use our resources on. You know what I'm saying?
I do, but I actually don't agree. And I'll tell you why. Because I think that those are honorable gentlemen, and they would never do something as insidious as marijuana.
You know they love that reefer. Come on.
Okay, so no, they're rolling deep. I got it.
He heard that phrase for the first time today during our production meeting, and now he's using it like he's a cool guy. Rolling deep. Get out of here.
Okay. No, I do cool talk. Anyway, no, of course a lot of them have smoked marijuana. Look at all of our presidents: Obama, Bush, Clinton. They all smoked, right? But to them, no. They remember most of these folks have no empathy at all. So they've been against marijuana legalization the whole time when they were smoking weed when they were in college, and God knows how much longer after that. And even look, even Obama. Obama's like, oh yeah, I smoked pot and I did the thing where hotboxing in the car or whatever. He did all that stuff. And then, hey, can you take it off of a Schedule I drug, which compares it to the most lethal drugs there is in the world? Nope, not gonna do that. Just as usual with Obama, play around the edges just a little bit. I'm gonna give you 5% change. But you did drugs, you did marijuana. Don't care. Bush, you did marijuana. Don't care, okay? None of them cared. So it's not their personal experience. They have no empathy. It's the money, Lebowski. Just like you said, you nailed it. It's like that money wound up being a gateway drug to legalization.
Absolutely.
And look, if that's what it takes, God bless, because it is less dangerous than alcohol. It's insane that it's illegal. So I hope that 69 becomes over 250. I hope they get enough senators. Let's go, let's go, let's go. Legalize it everywhere. And every state where you legalize, by the way, if it's a ballot measure in your state, make sure you get out there and vote. If there are people who are running for Congress who say they're gonna legalize, make sure you get out there and vote, because there's gonna be a tipping point. If enough politicians start taking money and getting the tax money as well, they're gonna vote to legalize, and this thing's gonna be over. So right now, we're in a dark place where we have Jeff Sessions as our Attorney General, who once said that he used to like the Klan until he found out that they smoked marijuana. So forget his views on the Klan, I assume he was joking, but that's how much he despises marijuana, right? So, but we will get rid of these guys at some point, and you could even override them. You can. That's how our system of government works, but you gotta vote for people who are on the right side of this issue. And it's an important issue, and it involves criminal justice reform. So don't take it lightly, go vote based on this.
So I would just like to toss to JR, who'd like to make a point, and it is seriously a coincidence that he's wearing the shirt that he's wearing.
I told you. Well, outside of just politicians that have used or maybe currently used, they're children. I mean, I'm not trying to throw anybody under the bus, But when Obama's kid was seen on camera at these events, and we're like, that's kind of a violation of her privacy. She didn't run for office. Now, if politicians' kids and family members start getting wrangled up and rounded up and put in the paddy wagons, oh, it'll change. But they know they're above that. It's also an indication of how they see our legal system. Like, yeah, sure, yeah, come for my kid. Guarantee you, whatever police officer, judge comes for me, you're never working again. Because they know they have this hierarchy of judicial system within our country.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Come for them, they'll stop it.
But of course they're never going to. The Bush daughters had a reputation for partying. I don't know if it was alcohol, whatever else they did, but no, they never got in trouble. The Trump kids look like they're high all the time. But the powerful never pay a penalty. The kids going to Ivy League schools never get arrested.
Right.
It's the poor that get crushed. It's a super important issue. Vote green.
Yes. Okay.
Let's turn the White House into a greenhouse.
You're a dork.
Agreed.
Yes. Turning to a devastating, serious story. 4 cops in South Carolina were tragically shot, although luckily they have not died as a result of the gunshot wounds. They were responding to a domestic violence call when the suspect later opened fire on them. So let me give you the details on that. It all began shortly after 10 p.m. after deputies responded to reports of a man assaulting a woman at a home outside of York, South Carolina. By the time the officers arrived to the scene, the male suspect had already fled on foot. At that point, they sent out a canine unit to find him. Now, a canine unit did manage to find the suspect, and that was when the suspect opened fire on the first cop. Unfortunately, he did get struck by bullets, but he was immediately sent to the hospital, and he is luckily still alive. Around 1:07 a.m. in an area near the home, the suspect opened fire and struck an officer from the canine unit. 2 hours later, around 3 a.m., the suspect opened fire again and struck 3 more officers. Now, the cops did shoot him. He did not die from the gunshot wounds. He is now in custody. He was identified as 47-year-old Christian Thomas McCall, and he will be facing serious charges as a result. But just to give you a little bit about McCall's past, he had been charged with assaulting an officer, resisting arrest, and assault back in 1994. So, luckily no one has died from this story, but what really stood out to me was the fact that it's very common for officers to be met with violence when they're responding specifically to domestic violence calls. In fact, let me give you some of the statistics on that. The National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial Fund released a report in 2016 which chronicled all law enforcement deaths in the line of duty between 2010 and 2014, and it showed that domestic dispute was the initial 911 call in 22% of cases, more than any other type of call.
Yeah, so let's talk about a couple of different angles to this story. One is that whenever there's a political shooting, and in this case, to the best of our knowledge, this has nothing to do with any kind of politics. So whether it's a political shooting that is tied to Islamic extremism or right-wing extremism, it gets a lot of coverage. The Islamic extremism, of course, gets far more coverage, but we make a big deal out of it. But as usual, the media focuses on the wrong things. I get it, it's sensational and it scares us, it makes us want to watch TV. But in reality, cops get hurt the most in domestic violence calls. There's nothing political, there's nothing to politicize, right? So cable news isn't talking about it 24/7. But in reality, that is when they are in most danger. So we should be cognizant of that. I hope the police departments around the country are cognizant of that. Secondarily, a lot of the mass shooters have a history of domestic violence. Sutherland Springs, Texas, the guy who shot all those folks in a church in Texas. The Las Vegas shooter, we try not to give the names after the first time we do the story because we don't want to glorify these shooters. But the Vegas massacre, that was a guy who had committed domestic violence before. The neo-Nazi in Charlottesville who ran people over, domestic violence again. You could say those are anecdotal, but you just saw the numbers that Anna gave. It is the #1 most likely time that an officer is going to be killed is responding to domestic violence.
So I agree with you that this particular story is not political in nature, but there is there is a political point that I want to make, and it's something that I think a lot of people get uncomfortable with, but it's just the fact of the matter and something that should be considered. So there are organizations like the NRA and some on the right, although not all, who believe that if an individual has a past of domestic violence, that person should still have his or her constitutional rights intact, meaning that they should still have their Second Amendment rights intact and they should be able to go purchase a weapon if they wish to do so. And I think that that's something that we should really rethink, especially given the threat that these individuals have posed to law enforcement and to the general public. I mean, we really need to start thinking about what standards, if any, we're ever gonna have in regard to who can purchase a gun.
So they say, no, that's a civil rights issue. I have my rights to a gun even if I've beaten people in the past in a domestic violence situation. But wait a minute, we give away our civil rights all the time. So we all take off our shoes at an airport. That has inconvenienced hundreds of millions, in fact, probably in mass billions of people.
I would argue that a TSA agent putting her hands down my pants and in my underwear, during a checkpoint or whatever, is an unreasonable search and seizure. I don't know.
Yeah, and look, I've gotten the pat down where they, had to go around my genitals as well. So I mean, it's not. You might say, hey, taking off your shoes is a small thing. That guy was an unsuccessful shoe bomber, never killed anybody. These are cops being killed. Mm-hmm. Hundreds of cops have been killed. Because we didn't take away guns from people who had committed crimes that we know are the most likely to get cops shot, right? So and then on the rights at the airports, I mean, yes, it gets way worse. The pat downs, etc. Because of why? The underwear bomber. Again, no one died. I want to be safe on a plane. I take planes all the time. But we all give away these massive rights. But when it comes to people who have committed domestic abuse, their rights we can't touch, even though that actually leads to tremendous violence, not only against the women and men who are abused, but then the cops who respond.
Right, and just think about that for a second. A person who has been, hurting whoever's living with them, has been guilty of domestic violence, owning a gun inside the home around the individuals that he or she has done domestic abuse to. It just sounds like a really bad idea, and it's something that we should really start to reconsider. I don't know if that'll ever happen, but it's scary to think that we continuously protect these people.
And if you think Blue Lives Matter, you should care about this. And one last thing about that, this is part of the reason why cops are so jittery. Why do they shoot so quickly? Another vicious cycle of violence that is created, because when they go to people's houses, even if they committed crimes in the past, even if they were violent crimes, a lot of times they still get to own a gun. So they're worried, hey, if I go to somebody's house, they're gonna shoot me. Because sometimes they wind up shooting 4 cops. So we have got to do just at least a little bit of regulation to get guns out of the hands of people who we already know are dangerous. Okay, look, we're gonna take a break. I miscounted. It's the Aziz Ansari story is actually the 4th story in Anna's rundown, my bad. And we're not trying to get you to watch more commercials. As you'll see, there are no commercials. Okay, just internal stuff for us. But
everything's gonna be all right. We're gonna come back, we're gonna do the story, you're gonna love it.
Yes, or you're gonna be intrigued by it.
Right.
The Aziz Ansari story when we return. Welcome to the Young Turks on a momentous day. What now? What now? We get animated about the news. Yes, we're not the robots on TV. I actually care about the news. Guilty, I care.
Senator Sanders, I'm gonna do something unusual. I'm gonna ask you a policy question.
How dare you? That's the problem, you're the problem. Don't ever attack the Republicans. Where the fuck is the liberal media? Where is it? I don't see it. No, these are all establishment guys. They love the system as it is. They're all enormously rich off the system that exists.
For us, this system isn't working.
So what this campaign is about is trying to create an economy that works not only for the people on top, but works for all Americans.
So what's happening in the Democratic Party is what used to happen in the general election. We would have a person who represented workers and the people and the voters, and then the Republicans would represent business and corporations and Wall Street, and we'd have a brick in an election. That's happening all inside the Democratic Party this time.
And instead of focusing on issues that actually matter to millennial voters, for instance, we're focusing on non-issues in the country. The fear-mongering about Muslims and terrorism.
Here comes Bernie in Illinois. Tell your friends, tell your family. This thing's not over. That voice in the wilderness, it created a ripple effect, which then now is a tidal wave as we stand right now. I love this show. We're gonna rock the boat. We're gonna be counter-establishment. We're gonna tell people the truth to the best of our abilities, and we're gonna keep it real with them.
Membership gives us so much journalistic freedom. It's incredible. So, tytnetwork.com/join.
What's J&A?
Ja'Cory and Arthur.
You guys share a mug?
Yeah, you both take our hot cocoa black.
That doesn't make any sense.
Plus, I'm right-handed and Arthur's left-handed, so our lips wouldn't even touch the same area. It's perfect.
No, I'm not left-handed.
What do you mean? I've seen you type with your left hand.
Yeah, and also with my right hand. That's how typing works.
Back on the Young Turks. Bud Askins writes in using hashtag TYT Live on Twitter. One has worked hard his entire life, paid taxes, devoted father to his wife and children, not accused of any crimes. The other has never worked a day in his life, cheated on taxes, 3 times married, and accused of multiple crimes. Tell me again which one is getting deported?
We need a merit-based system, okay?
Excellent point, Anna. Stephen Scales says, as a black man dealing with racism in America my entire life, I'm starting to see this country the way my grandmother used to describe to me as a child.
Oh, that is so devastating.
Yes, that's a scary and unfortunate thought, but unfortunately very real these days. Okay, tytnetwork.com/join to become a member, get the full show anytime you want, no ads. All right, what's next, Anna?
Okay. Over the weekend, comedian Aziz Ansari was talked about, written about in a publication known as Babe. The author, Katie Way, recounted a story by an anonymous woman. They used a pseudonym, Grace, to talk about her and her experience with Aziz Ansari. Now, the title or the headline of the piece was, I went on a date with Aziz Ansari. It turned into the worst night of my life. which kind of primes you for a devastating account of sexual misconduct, criminal behavior, something really bad. But as you read her account, you learn that Aziz Ansari was interested in having sex with her. She did not want to have sex with him. They didn't end up doing what she didn't want to do after she made it clear she didn't want to do it. And I was left wondering what the issue was. But don't take that from me. I want you guys to hear the important parts of this piece and judge for yourselves. So I'm gonna go ahead and read that to you, and then we'll have a discussion. So this is how it was described in the Babe piece. They walked back to his apartment building. When they walked back in, she complimented his marble countertops. According to Grace, Ansari turned the compliment into an invitation. He said something along the lines of, "How about you hop up and take a seat?" Within moments, he was kissing her. In a second, his hand was on my breast. Then he was undressing her. Then he undressed himself. She remembers feeling uncomfortable at how quickly things escalated. Now, this was following a date that they had. Apparently, they had met after an awards ceremony. They were at some sort of party. He had some sort of old school camera. She's an aspiring photographer, so she noticed that camera, and they sparked a conversation that way. And they exchanged numbers. And then later on, when they both flew back to New York, they went out on this date. And what she's detailing here is the experience she had once they went to his apartment after the date, okay?
And I'm just gonna give one more detail before they got to his apartment. She also wrote that during the dinner, in fact, I'll give two quick details. He ordered white wine and she had wanted red wine. Okay, and she also said that he got the bill and paid it in a hurry, and then they went back to his apartment.
Yeah, yes. So let me give you more. The main thing was that he wouldn't let her. The main thing was that he wouldn't let her move away from him. She compared the path. That's weird. That's not the graphic I want to go to yet. Okay, let's go to the next graphic, please. Throughout the course of her short time in the apartment, she says she used verbal and non-verbal cues to indicate how uncomfortable and distressed she was. Most of my discomfort was expressed in me pulling away and mumbling. I know that my hand stopped moving at some points. I stopped moving my lips and turned cold. Now that's a very important part of the piece because Grace makes it very clear that her communication was non-verbal until the very end when she made it clear that she did not want to have sex. At that point, he was like, okay, then we're not having sex. Why don't we go back to the couch and chill with our clothes on, okay? And so he didn't pressure her or force her to have sex, after she said no. He complied with what she wanted. So let me give you more. Most of my discomfort was expressed in me pulling away and mumbling. Okay, whether Ansari didn't notice Grace's reticence or knowingly ignored it is impossible for her to say. I know I was physically giving off cues that I wasn't interested. I don't think that was noticed at all. He kept asking, so I said, next time, meaning asking for sex. And he goes, oh, you mean second date? And I go, oh yeah, sure. And he goes, well, if I poured you another glass of wine, would it count as our second date? He then poured her a glass of wine and handed it to her. She excused herself to the bathroom soon after. Then she went back to Ansari. He asked her if she was okay. I said, I don't want to feel forced because then I'll hate you, and I'd rather not hate you. She told Babe that at first she was happy with how he reacted. He said, oh, of course it's only fun if we're both having fun. Then he said, let's chill over here on the couch. Okay, so at that point they were hanging out on the couch, but they both still did not have their clothes on, right? When she sat down on the floor next to Ansari, who sat on the couch, she thought he might rub her back or play with her hair, something to calm her down. Okay. So then,
so he didn't play with her hair.
He didn't play with her hair. At that point, he thought, all right, well, I don't know what the physical cues were, but he apparently tried to have sex one last time. She made it super clear, don't want to have sex. At that point, that was when he told her, why don't we put our clothes on and chill on the couch? And at that point, they did it. as they were watching TV, a Seinfeld episode apparently, she told him, you know, all of you guys are the same. She used an expletive in there. And at that point, she decided to leave. He called her a cab and she left. And she just says that during the entire cab ride, she was crying. So that was the gist of the story. And the way that it was described by her was that, you know, it took her a while to validate this experience as sexual assault, but that she does feel like it was a sexual assault, even though she never verbally told him, I don't want to have sex with you, until the very end. And as soon as she said that, he stopped. So I don't, okay, so go ahead, jump in.
Okay, so look guys, it's really important in these stories to try to walk in the other person's foot for a second and see each other's perspective. So, and I'm a guy, so of course I see the guy's perspective first. I'm keeping it real on that. And back when I was a conservative, this story would have flipped me out and I would have not bothered to see the other perspective. So now even so, you know, you're gonna see where I come out on it. But let's look at both sides, okay? So first let's look at her point of view and the point of view of a lot of women, okay? So a lot of times pressured into sex, and a lot of folks are, number one, a lot of them got pressured into sex and then they said no and it happened anyway. So for those group of women who have gone through a horrific experience, when they see a story like this, it is hard for them not to personalize it, not to feel like I was there, right? And that happened to me and then something terrible happened to me. Now in this case, it is certainly an open question as to whether something terrible happened next, right? And so I think that old me would have gotten angry at those people, right? And so what I'm asking you to do is not to get angry on either side and to say, oh, okay, I didn't have that experience. I haven't been a woman who's been nonstop pressured, and I haven't been a woman who's been assaulted, okay? So
I have to jump in. So I am a woman, and so, you know, my natural bias, I guess, is to understand the woman's perspective, hear her out before I even consider the perspective of anyone else. So I'm being clear with you guys about what my personal bias is. Now, with that said, as a woman, I've also had my own personal experiences that were actually shockingly similar to what she experienced that night. And I never once thought of myself as a victim. And the reason why I didn't is because as soon as I made it clear, just like she did, that I was not interested in any type of sexual relationship, the guy stopped. And for me to publicly out that person while concealing my identity and potentially destroy his life, his career, I think is, to be quite honest with you, outrageous, okay? Now, let me be clear about something. Nonverbal communication is not clear, right? So what might seem like clear nonverbal communication to you might not be clear communication for the other party, which is why it's so incredibly important to verbally communicate that you're not interested, which she eventually did, and immediately after she did that, he complied, okay?
Yeah, so again, but one more, and I'm gonna get to Aziz's side in a second, but one more thing. A lot of women have, whether they were frightened or just didn't know what to do, they didn't feel comfortable, and next thing you know, they were having sex. Not in this case, they had oral sex, right? And she says that he kept moving her hand down to her genitals, etc. Look, everybody's been involved in 1,000 uncomfortable, awkward situations, but a lot of women have felt that way, and then the sex actually happened, and they felt, maybe I should have said something, maybe I shouldn't, I don't know, I got stuck in that situation, and they feel terrible about it. So when they see this story, they react in a way of like, damn it, I've been there, and they get mad. But it is important, so I understand that. But it is also important that we be fair to everyone involved and take every story on its own merits. And in this case, she didn't say she participated all along. She participated all along. And so I brought up the wine thing and the hair thing for a second, because why are you putting that in the story? Because it loses credibility for yourself.
I think it's important to actually give you the exact quote regarding the wine, because it's in the very beginning of the piece, and it really stood out to me too because of the wording that she utilized. I didn't get to choose, so she was asked about the drink. Drank red wine. It was white, she said. I didn't get to choose. I prefer red, but it was white wine.
Like, why mention that?
It's just, there's just all sorts of little, I mean, look, some people love to mention microaggressions, right? And I feel like there are little statements made throughout that made it seem as though she had absolutely no control over the situation, that he had 100% of the control. And I think that that's not an accurate way of depicting what actually happened.
Yeah, and so what, there are many things we're worried about. One of which is that this assumes that women have no agency, that they are, look, we all want women to be strong and independent. I thought that's what feminism was about and what we were fighting for. Like, you know what, you could say, hey, I prefer red wine. You could say that, right? And it goes to a state of mind here. I don't want to overemphasize the wine because it's not important, right? But it goes to a state of mind. And same with the hair. Like, why didn't he play with my hair? But you never told him to play with your hair. How? And New York Times writer, a woman wrote, I'm a proud feminist, and Aziz Ansari cannot read your mind. And that's of course the core of the argument. And that is true. So even if you're, and so sometimes I get in trouble when I say this, but look, if you are in an uncomfortable situation, please be strong. And I know sometimes it's hard, and you didn't, being put in an awkward situation, being put in an uncomfortable situation is often not what you asked for, right? And sometimes a man is physically intimidating and you feel scared. So Whoopi Goldberg said on The View, why don't you just kick him in the nuts? But look, that's glib, because a lot of times you can't do that. And so, and if you said that about someone who was actually date raped, that is victim blaming, right? But it is also true that you should say, if you don't want to do something, you should say it. And because he can't
read your mind. He can't read your mind. Period.
So if you're a woman in that situation, now I want you to, for a second, also put yourself in the perspective of a guy. It appears he had no idea. You might not believe that. You might say, oh, he should have known. He should have known my nonverbal cues, my mumbling. Those are her words, not my words. And he should have, and maybe he should have. Maybe if he was a super cool guy, he would have been like, hey, you know what? She doesn't look like she's into it. And by the way, guys, if she doesn't look like she's into it, for God's sake, stop. Don't, and not just for your sake, but for her sake, stop, right? Because this is the world we're in now. So, and maybe that's a slightly better thing, by the way, because maybe that avoids a lot of women being put in situations where they didn't want to be in. But in terms of blaming Aziz Ansari, it's true, he can't read your mind. If you don't want him to do something, say it instead of mumbling or hoping that he understands your nonverbal cues. And by the way, she did. She said no at one point. He said, let's put on our clothes and chill out on the couch, and they did.
Yeah.
You can, if a guy who's, when you say no, he puts on his clothes and he stops. If that guy is equally guilty as the guy who doesn't, well, then you've diminished what rape and sexual assault means, and you've done great damage to the movement, to this wonderful liberating movement of Me Too, which for all these women who were suffering under sexual harassment, sexual assault, couldn't talk about it. We just did the Eliza Dushku story yesterday. It's heart-wrenching. Don't diminish that by saying a guy who said, when you say no stops, is equally guilty of, because she used the word sexual assault.
So I want to, just to, further solidify the fact that Ansari had no idea that she was this bothered and uncomfortable. The next day, he had sent her a text message. By the way, this was all shown to Katie Way of Babe. And he wrote, it was fun meeting you last night. And then she responded, you ignored clear nonverbal cues. You kept going with advances, Grace explains. I want to make sure that you're aware so maybe the next girl doesn't have to cry on the ride home. And he responded, I'm so sad to hear this. Clearly I misread things in the moment and I'm truly sorry.
By the way, that is now being used against him. So there is an article in Law and Crime saying that since he apologized, he might have accidentally confessed to 2 crimes. These are really, really serious issues. So if you're going to anonymously accuse someone of sexual assault, if you don't understand that that could ruin his career, that could ruin his life, and people aren't gonna read the entirety of the article. They're just not. They're gonna see the headlines. And his picture is gonna go next to Harvey Weinstein's picture. And so I don't care if you got angry at Matt Damon, and maybe I'm a bad guy for saying that, but they are not the same thing. That one guy is a monster of monsters, okay? That does all of these non-consensual things. Another guy listens to what a woman said, and now their pictures are next to one another. The headlines say the similar things. It's not right. And when you ruin someone's life, there are oftentimes plenty of good reasons to do it. Harvey Weinstein, Roger Ailes, Kevin Spacey, the list goes on and on and on. But I think you have a moral duty to take a little care in that process. And now I don't know. I hope he does. Based on my reading of the story, I hope he doesn't face legal consequences. But if we're going in this direction, and by the way, now it makes guys reluctant to say that, to apologize and to say that they did the wrong thing and try to see it your way.
I think what's lacking in this discussion, and I think the reason why it's lacking is because people are afraid to just come forward and say it. But if we get blowback, then we get blowback. We're not having a nuanced discussion at all when it comes to this movement. We are not differentiating between various types of sexual misconduct. We are not differentiating between a bad date from what happened with Harvey Weinstein. We're not differentiating any of it. We're just kind of lumping everything together into one group because, in some cases, women felt slighted. In some cases, women were raped. And you can't compare those two things. Well, you can't, you should compare those two things, but you can't lump them into the same group. And I think that's the big problem right now. And anyone who has the audacity to speak out against that unnuanced, discussion that's taking place in the country gets demonized. And I think that unfortunately stops an important conversation from happening. Destroying the careers of people who haven't actually committed crimes, who haven't actually sexually assaulted people. That is a very scary world to live in. And I'm seeing things happen now for political reasons, with people with political agendas making all sorts of crazy accusations. And that stuff really concerns me because it does damage on so many different components of this issue. And it especially minimizes cases of sexual assault and rape when you lump everything together like this.
I actually think Ashley Banfield had a great point about that. I want to go to that, and then when we come back, I want to discuss one last thing, which is cultural difference in America. Because I think millennials are seeing things differently, or some portion of millennials are seeing things differently, so differently than I would say, quote unquote, the rest of us, that it's fascinating. So first, let's go to Ashley Banfield making a similar point to Anna.
The Me Too movement has righted a lot of wrongs, and it has made your career path much smoother. And here's where I'm guessing it's gonna be a long career path. You're 23. What a gift. Yet you looked that gift horse in the mouth and chiseled away at that powerful movement with your public accusation. And I'm gonna repeat this because it's important. If you were sexually assaulted, go to the cops. If you were sexually harassed, jeopardizing your work, speak up and speak out loud. But by your own descriptions, that is not what happened. You had an unpleasant date and you did not leave. That is on you. And all the gains that have been achieved on your behalf and mine are now being compromised by the allegations that you threw out there. And I'm going to call them reckless and hollow. I cannot name you publicly and sentence you to a similar career hit as Ansari because you chose to remain anonymous. Lucky you. But as you grow in your photography career, I really do hope that you remember what you did to someone else's career, all because of that bad date that was not a sexual assault, that was not sexual harassment by your description. And I hope the next time you go on a bad date, you stand up sooner, you smooth out your dress, and you bloody well leave. Because the only sentence that a guy like that deserves is a bad case of blue balls, not a Hollywood blackball.
So, look, it does damage to the Me Too movement because it allows so many guys, and I know the guy's perspective. It allows a lot of guys to go, I knew it was all BS from the beginning. Oh, that's terrible, it's not BS. Roger Ailes would take out his penis and chase women around his office. Matt Lauer had the button to lock the door behind them. I can go on and on. Harvey Weinstein would literally barge into their house and rip off their clothes and rape them. And this is what they dealt with at work. And it was just, that's why I keep saying the movement has liberated millions of women. So this does, in our opinion, does damage to that movement. And by the way, it also pushes a lot of people to the right wing. They go, if that's the progressive position, I don't want any part of that. And here we are as progressives saying, no, it is not necessarily the progressive position. And so one more thing, and maybe I'm a little older, And the person who wrote about this at The Atlantic, it's a woman who says, look, she's a proud feminist. She went through a couple of sexual assaults, but she's a little older. For millennial women, apparently, according to Economist YouGov poll, 25% of millennial age American women think asking someone for a drink is harassment. And more than a third say that if a man compliments a woman's looks, it is harassment. Not at work, just period. I don't know how we're gonna get along if that's the new standard. And but that's a cultural difference. And so they view the world obviously in a very different way, and they don't understand us. They're like, how could you not see that we are being pressured and we are being asked to do things we don't want to do? And this is, if I like the guy, then yes, great. But if I don't, it's terrible, right? So we have to try to understand each other, and there's gonna be a lot of hurt feelings and a lot of misunderstanding and miscommunication and probably a lot of anger before we get to a place where we can be joined again as one community. But right now, there is vast differences among us. And I think that this is a case that is beginning to have people say, this might have gone too far.
Yeah, and it's really hard to articulate this, but as a woman, I'm starting to become increasingly irritated with people deciding for me that I'm a victim. And I'm not a victim. I am not someone who anyone should feel sorry for. I get to decide. I get to decide when I'm a victim. I get to decide when I work in a hostile work environment or anything like that. No one gets to decide that for me. And I feel like I'm seeing a lot of that right now in the media that I don't appreciate. So.
Okay, we're out of time. I hope we did justice to that issue, and stay with us. We've got Rebel Headquarters coming up next, some great progressive candidates, and then we'll do a post game afterwards as well. All right, bye-bye. you guys today, and then I want to tell you about one quick news event in a second. Also remember, we're getting a lot of guests from you guys now. rebelhq@tytnetwork.com to suggest guests, I suppose topics as well, but certainly events. So if there's a rally being held or protests or anything along those lines, or a great candidate you know of in the country, and it could be national or local, it doesn't matter. rebelhq@tytnetwork.com. Okay, now let me tell you about one quick thing. So Wolfpack is on the march, and they're fighting in a lot of different states now. At the beginning of the year, a lot of the state legislatures go back to work, and that is when Wolfpack needs them to pass a resolution to call for a convention to get money out of politics, okay? So right now, we need your help in that if you're in the state of Connecticut. So there is going to be a Connecticut State House meeting. It's going to be on Wednesday, January 24th at 1 p.m. These legislators are greatly affected by actual citizens of those states coming out and making a difference. I've seen it happen in states that we've passed: Rhode Island, California, New Jersey, Illinois. We had a mountain army in Illinois. So when you guys go up there, I remember in New Jersey, a legislator was like, "I've never seen anything like this." Hundreds of young people who came to actually get money out of politics. It's amazing, and it makes a huge difference. And Connecticut is so close, we can win there. So please be the person that makes the difference. So if you want to know how you can participate or get more information, go to john@wolf-pack.com. By the way, you guys are the ones that helped to hire John, and he has been hired. And so now he's busy at work, organizing at the state level. So thank you for all the people who went and donated and became members of Wolfpack that allowed John to come in-house and work with Wolfpack and getting money out of politics. So different times, different states will be up. Right now, Connecticut's up. Let's go fight and let's go win. They want to make sure that you don't get energized and you don't go to fix the system. But if you do, and if you fight hard, you can. Every time we've won, whether it's civil rights, women's rights, gay rights, it's because people got up and fought and got those improbable victories. And in Connecticut, it is actually very likely to happen, but we need you guys there to bring it that last extra mile. So john@wolf-pack.com to figure out how you can participate. Okay, now let me go to our guests. First up is Dottie Nygaard. Dottie Nygaard, thank you for joining us at Rebel headquarters. Great to have you here.
Thank you so much, Cenk. I'm honored to be here.
Oh, thank you. So Dottie's running in the California's 10th district, and she is a nurse. We talked to her before, but I wanted to check in on your race and see how you're doing. I saw this quote of yours that I actually want to start with. We're going to talk about healthcare, obviously. It's an issue that you care a lot about. Living wage, these are all important. But on today's Young Turks show, we're talking about marijuana. So I wanted to go to this quote from you. You said, "In the emergency room in 30 years, I can tell you I've never seen a cardiac arrest or a respiratory arrest from pot." So give us a sense, as a nurse who's been in the emergency room for 30 years, in the scope of the different drugs, whether it's prescription painkillers, alcohol, pot, or the harder drugs, heroin, meth, etc. Where does pot rank in there?
You know, Cenk, it's so amazing that this plant that we have had for the last 30 years, 40 years, we've been fighting against, classified as the same class as heroin. You know, I remember when I was growing up, the push to start to decriminalize it and legalize it. And we've come quite a way, but we still have so far to go. We need to just legalize it, get it across the board. There's so many medicinal properties with pot. I'm just a firm believer that it's not going anywhere. And, you know, it does show that it has great capacity to, you know, fight off seizures, fight off nausea for chemo, fight off headaches and anxiety. And this is the age we're in. So, you know, I'm a strong supporter of legalizing marijuana. Look how much it's contributed to both Colorado and Oregon. And let's just make it happen, because it is not the devastating drug as opioids or heroin or the fentanyl that is ravishing our communities. It is, if anything, a calmer type of medication that makes you more happy and hungry than anything.
Yeah.
You'll end up fighting over the Dorito bag than really causing any type of strong conflict or any type of medical issue. So yes, I'm a strong supporter of legalizing marijuana and using it for what its truly purpose is.
And so you're running in California, but I want the audience to understand that the story that we covered earlier on the Young Turks was about how they need votes in Congress to make sure that the Trump administration does not interfere with states' rights on this issue. So as good as the laws are in California that we just passed, and this was the citizens who passed it, if there's not enough Congress people to support that, the feds can actually come in and raid and invalidate those laws. So every congressperson matters. And in your district, you've actually got a Republican, but he won by less than 5% last time. His name is Jeff Denham. So it's a very winnable district. So let me ask you a little bit about him. How, in California, I don't know if he claims to be a moderate Republican or not. How often does he vote with Trump?
Almost 99%. Jeff Denham is actually more of a Tea Party Republican. He is all aligned with Trump. He's pretty much kind of like a rubber stamp. So yes, he has promised at one turn not to do anything to affect the healthcare, and the next day he votes against the healthcare. So he's pretty much booted so many people off of healthcare in our district. He says that he's a champion for immigration and for the DACA, yet he can't even rally his own colleagues to get this DACA bill passed. So yes, he's a very he's a challenge. He's a challenge. He's not one here that stands up for the people. And we really need to have a people's candidate in there that knows what the people are up against. And I feel that that's me. I really see what people want, and I hear them, and I listen to them, and I want to be that voice for them.
So Dottie's with the National Nurses United, which I would argue is the most progressive union there is in the country. So in a district that close, I think she has an excellent chance. But Denham has a $1.5 million war chest, of course, from corporate PACs. Dottie doesn't take corporate PACs. So I just want to show you guys the links real quick on how you could help Dottie. And I will, of course, have these in the description box below on YouTube and in the comment section on Facebook. So if you can donate your time, wonderful. Our volunteer armies are going to wipe these guys off the map. But if you can't donate the time, definitely donate small dollar donations or as much as you can afford to make sure that these progressives have a real fighting chance to win. So let's talk about the state of your race, Dottie. I imagine there are others in the race. How do you stand among the different Democrats?
Right now, Cenk, I'm going to just throw out there that I'm really excited about this race because yesterday I received the news that I have the endorsement from CD10, Our Revolution. So very pleased with that, knowing that this is our chance to push progressive values. This is what we are all up against. And with the candidates that are in the race right now, I will say I am the most progressive that is going to stand up for those values. We have every Democrat across the spectrum, and it is a challenge. But I'm going to say I am that progressive voice that is going to push for really what we want to see long term. That we have to get money out of politics. That we need health care. We need to get tuition-free college. We have to build up our infrastructure. We need to have peace and not so much war. So I am a very strong progressive, and I am going to push with every ounce of my might for those values to come into this district.
Wouldn't it be amazing?
Join me.
Wouldn't it be amazing, as I talk to all of you guys who are running without corporate PAC money and are real Americans, wouldn't it be amazing if we had people who were nurses who then said, hey, you know what, I care about my community and I'm going to go fight for them in Congress and actually represent them. I love that idea. I want it to come true, and I think you're right on the doorstep, and people need to help in all these different districts to push over that step. And we don't have to keep begging corporate Democrats to give us morsels off the table. We can actually elect real Americans, real progressives, to do that, and Dottie certainly qualifies there. I want to ask you about one more issue. Look, you're for Medicare for all. You're obviously for getting money out of politics. Everybody understands that. I want to talk about wages a little bit, though. So what's your stance on a living wage?
I'm a strong supporter of raising our minimum wage. 15 is a good start, but yes, we need livable wages. I'm a strong supporter of unions, and that is what has built up this incredible country. So I'm going to actually fight tooth and nail against right to work, because we need to stand in solidarity as unions to make sure that we keep that fabric of our democracy intact, that we can have livable wages, great working environments, safe working conditions, and that we do consider a value on the worker. We need to bring that back, because we have long been so oppressed and suppressed by so many corporations and so many employers that it's time for workers to really unite in this fight for livable wages.
Look, $7.25 is somehow unbelievably still the minimum wage at the federal level. That's a little over $15,000 a year for working full time, 40 hours a week.
That's poverty.
Almost every week. But even if Dottie's right, even if we get to $15, that's a little over $31,000. It's not asking for too much. That should be the beginning of the conversation. Imagine having representatives who represent you and fight for that. I think Dottie Nygaard is one of those. So thank you for joining us, Dottie, today at Rebel Headquarters.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Cenk. I really appreciate it.
All right, everybody.
And we will fight for progressive values, believe me, hard and strong.
I love that. We fight strong for progressive values. Don't forget the links down below to help Dottie Nygaard. Thank you, Dottie. We'll be right back. All right, back at Rebel headquarters. You know, I decided I should clarify one thing for you guys who watch the show regularly. If you're watching it live, you'll often hear me talking about the description box below or comment section on Facebook. That's for when we put these interviews up on YouTube and Facebook later. For you guys watching live, obviously that's where we're putting up the graphics. And if you can't write it down quick enough, it's okay. Just Google their names and you'll get it. 9 out of 10 times, but I just wanted you guys to not be confused, like where the hell's the description box if I'm watching live on tytnetwork.com, right? So anyway, I think you guys get it. You're far more savvy than I am on these issues. Anyways, let's go to the next guest. Bob Solomon's joining us. He's running as a Democrat in Pennsylvania's 18th district. He's got a unique race, and Bob, welcome to Rebel headquarters, and I'm really gonna leave it to you to describe what in the world is going on over there. I get that Tim Murphy is resigning because he tried to get his mistress to get an abortion. That's the Republican there, right? So that means we got a special election, right?
Yes, that's exactly what it means. Last September, the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, a stellar example of the value of a free press in a democracy, broke a scandal in which Representative Murphy was revealed to be a participant in a rather shocking bit of hypocrisy. And he resigned in disgrace in fairly short order after the story broke. So under Pennsylvania election law, the governor has scheduled a special election, which is on March 13th. And the Democratic and Republican party establishments both selected candidates through processes that they determined for themselves. The Democratic Party establishment is composed primarily of people who don't believe that a progressive Democrat can win this election, and they chose someone who does not have a record in politics and does not have any established positions on issues, and for the most part is rather clearly avoiding taking positions on matters of policy. And clearly it's the party establishment's view and that of his campaign and his handlers that's really the best approach.
So I want to get to your role in this in a second. So Murphy resigning, special election, that's clear. How did the Democrats decide who was going to run against the Republican in the special election? That's the part I'm a little confused on.
Well, there are Democratic committees on the, I guess you would call it the municipal level, townships, boroughs, and so forth throughout the 18th congressional district. The total number of people who are eligible to serve on these Democratic committees is over 1,400. The number who actually currently fill spots on those committees is 900 some. The number of people who turned up for an endorsement convention, which was held on November 19th, was about 550. Those were people from Democratic committees across the district, and those of us who were in this race did everything that we could within the period of several weeks prior to this endorsement convention to connect with members of Democratic committees. We all went to numerous meetings and candidate forums and spoke to them and talked to them about ourselves and our positions. And then they got together on November 19th and heard 5-minute speeches from each of the candidates, and then engaged in a balloting process that determined what their recommendation to the state Democratic Party was going to be.
So that's a unique situation where there is no primary, the voters don't get to decide, the Democratic delegates decided.
Exactly.
Okay, so Bob, where does that leave you?
Well, it actually leaves me on the same trajectory on which I started. When I filed with the FEC early last summer, my plan was to seek the Democratic nomination via the primary, which is going to be held in mid-May, and that's still where I'm headed. My campaign is in the process of vigorous fundraising efforts at this point. As you might surmise, it's a grassroots campaign relying on individual donations, and we're working hard on raising money. And then next month there will be a petition drive to gather signatures on petitions to qualify to be on the ballot in May. Under Pennsylvania election law, there's a period of about 3 weeks for gathering signatures on petitions, so we'll be doing that. And then the plan is to be on the ballot for the Democratic primary in mid-May.
So, by the way, we'll put up the links here if you want to help Bob Solomon, and they'll always be in the description box on YouTube and comment section on Facebook. And so, Bob, you're not in the special election. You're just going forward exactly as you were planning before Murphy resigned to be in the election in November of 2018. And obviously, there's a primary before that. So even if the Democrat picked by the establishment wins, you'll be in a primary against him in June. Is that right?
The primary's in May.
Oh,
yes. When I filed last summer, my intention was to run in this election as a progressive Democrat. And what I found out during the process throughout 2017 was that I was the one and only person seeking the Democratic nomination as a progressive, and that's still true. The person chosen by the Democratic Party establishment is not a progressive, but there will be someone on the ballot in the primary in May who is a progressive, and you're looking at him.
So, Bob, you're a doctor, and you've been specializing in emergency medicine for 32 years, and you got your progressive platform. The conventional wisdom is that people say, "Oh no, in a district this heavily Republican," and it is. It favors Republicans by at least 11 points. You should not be as progressive. You should try to get the Republican voters in that district, and that's why the guy running right now, you would argue, is wishy-washy. So, what's your thesis for why those voters will vote for a progressive candidate instead?
Well, frankly, I don't necessarily expect people who are registered Republicans who always vote Republican to vote for a progressive Democrat. But the fact is that even though this district is pegged at R+11 by Charlie Cook and Larry Sabato, there are actually 70,000 more registered Democrats than Republicans in the district. So then the question is, well, why is the district voting Republican? And I think it's really pretty simple. First, unfortunately, Democratic voter turnout tends to be not quite up to snuff relative to Republican voter turnout. Second, there are Democrats who have historically been voting in a manner that people such as you and I recognize as being against their self-interest. And I think it's possible to get people who've been voting Republican to understand that when someone who's a regular guy or gal votes Republican, he or she is voting against self-interest, and to come around to an understanding that it's time to stop doing that.
All right, one final question for you, Bob. So you're a doctor for all these decades. Why decide to run for Congress?
Well, I've spent a lot of time over the years engaged in political advocacy, talking to folks on Capitol Hill and elsewhere in DC, people in regulatory agencies about health policy. And I have very strong feelings that have developed over the period of my career that we must stop being the only country in the first world that doesn't have universal health care, that doesn't guarantee access to quality health care to everyone on our soil, just as a matter of being here in the United States. It's time to join the rest of the first world. We should have done it a long time ago, long past time to do it. And I think it's important to have some people on Capitol Hill among the 535 elected members of the House and Senate who really understand our healthcare system and who have expertise in health policy. Right now, the number of people of whom that is true is very tiny. And I think it's time to send somebody to Capitol Hill who can offer that expertise and help to shape the debate over how to reform our absurdly fragmented non-system of financing healthcare in this country.
All right, Bob Solomon running for Congress in Pennsylvania's 18th district. Thank you for joining us at Rebel Headquarters.
Thank you very much for having me on.
Great. I like to hear from these rebels across the country. They say he shouldn't run. He's going to do it anyway. All right, we're going to take a quick break here. If you're a member, don't worry. We're coming right back with Anna in the postgame, tytnetwork.com. /join to become a member. All right, we'll see you there.